class can kind of have an understanding. Cool, thanks. So hello everybody. As I was saying, we are supposed to finish lectures today, but I'm kind of pushing it forward a little bit. And so next week we will have another lectures. And one of the reasons for that is because as we are going through the book, it's overly theoretical. Things are very, conceptual and things like that. So I figured it would be good to really present some existing frameworks, so people kind of are familiar with it, understand, rather than just talking about, say, FedRAM, NIST, just so people kind of know what exactly is FedRAM, what is NIST, what are those kind of DoD SRG, HIPAA, and all of those, including where to get resources. So that's what we are going to talk about next week, just to introduce some couple of existing frameworks and controls. And then I know there are a couple of discussions around the overall paper. I think we have kind of covered on the project side of things for the group projects. The rubric is up there and everything. But for the paper, so I've already added some, in addition to what we have as instructions, I kind of added just at a high level, a couple of instructions, including the template. So the template is now available on the resource page. It's a basic template, nothing really major around it. It's just introductions and the need to have like an abstract, couple with literature review, and then your strategy, methodology, or whatever you want to call it, and then just a line item for also conclusion, and then absolutely there is a need for references. Now, you do not need to follow that template if you have a plan to submit to a certain journal or a conference. If they have a paper format, please follow it. If they have a wording instructions as well as like word count, so let's say the journal says the maximum word count should be 1,500, and in this class we said 2,500. Please go ahead, follow what the journal says. Just keep in mind, the goal will be for you to submit it. So if you're following those instructions from the journal, you have to submit it by the due date. And that's before the class ends. And I do need to see a confirmation email, probably set up 15 minutes with you to talk. Around selecting a conference or journal to kind of submit your paper, there are a lot of predatory journals out there, and some journals are really not the best. I think you're better off writing a paper and just putting it on your website than publishing in certain journals. So feel free to reach out if you kind of want to know if a journal is worthy of publishing within it. Like we will help with looking at the impact factor and also ensuring alignment with your topic. But then also there's like the wiki CFP here. So it's just kind of like a collection of different call for papers. Doesn't mean that all papers here are good. It just means like it gives you a place where you can kind of go and search for existing conferences and maybe journals that you might be able to publish in. As you can see, I just clicked on security, and as you're going through it, you can even go back, search a paper, let's say based on cloud, if you want to look at it, and then you'll see a couple of papers. Like this is the 22nd IEM, IEEE and ACM International Symposium on Cluster Cloud and Internet Computing. The deadline is December 1st. And the conference is happening in May. Now, I do not know the impact factor related to this, but definitely if this is something you're interested in, then we can certainly spend some time and cycle to look into it, okay? These are all things we can do it. Oh, look at it, it's happening in Italy. But I think, so yeah, things like that definitely we can work together to see if this is actually a conference worthy of publishing within. Topic ideas. I know, please hold on. I will kind of allow you to ask some questions. Let me just finish with this real quick. So I know topic ideas, some of you are already working on your papers because we have reached out and we kind of agree on your topics. But if you're still struggling, here are like 5 topics. Just came up with these. I plan to add more topics, as I think of them. But also, if you have yours that you want to specifically work on, please go for that. Just let us know. Maybe shoot me an email and copy Fortune, and we'll be able to set up just 15 or 30 minutes with you to discuss the topic and help you frame it. However, if you plan on using this, just keep in mind that you have to. So I know Fortune has a plan, but I kind of wrote like. So Fortune, do you want to go? Because I know you
sure. I'm falling a little bit behind. By the end of class, guys, you go back and click on this module, the last module, the cybersecurity. I'm going to erase this. I'm going to just put in a sign-up sheet. It's going to have the topics of 1 through 5 here. And if those topics interest you, just simply put your name on it. And if you have a topic of your own, just simply put that topic of your name, put that topic, and then put your name next to it. So you'll see the sign-up sheet, and you can feel free to ping me and privately in the private set of chat or after class. But by the end of class, you'll see it. And maybe on the break, we can circle back around this. It's going to be uploaded soon.
Sure, no problem. Thanks a lot, Fortune. Yeah, I'm overly, I guess, manual, because initially I was saying, just send me an email and I'll go in there and mark it. But Fortune was saying something about having a sign-up sheet might be better. So, yeah. And obviously, there are additional details regarding the paper in the syllabus, as well as the deck that we had. But please, these topics are just meant to, you don't have to take them one for one, just some ideas. And if you see something, let me give an example. Like number one, where we say, you can write on a paper that strategizes how the healthcare, it's actually, there's a typo there, but it's just be like how the healthcare can secure and manage the security risk and challenges that come with the usage of multi-cloud solutions. So that needs to be rewritten. There's a bit of a typo there, but basically looking at how can healthcare sectors really manage the ongoing challenges around the use of multi-cloud solutions. So you find maybe a healthcare is using AWS, a bit of Azure, and then maybe Okta for the authentication and whatsoever. And we had a couple of discussions in this class around those kind of complexity of architecture. So those discussions are more towards the current issues and whatever, but what should be done and specific to, like, say, healthcare. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do healthcare. If you want to look at it from the military sector, educational sector, financial sector, totally fine. Just reach out, let us know. Or I guess I will say add it to the sign-up sheet, and we'll just have an agreement, and that's good. And that's pretty much it that I have for now. So any questions on this? Anyone? I think someone was trying to ask some questions.
Yeah, Dr. Waziri, we actually chatted about this, our one-on-one. I do have a topic, and I think you did approve it, but I'm going to confirm with you outside of class, actually.
No, I believe based on the meet, like we have is this Vito?
Yes, it is.
Oh, sure. Sorry. You and Joe are kind of off mic. That's why I was kind of trying to verify. But yeah, so I know we had a full session with you, and that topic is basically good to go. Unless you have other questions, then we can sync one-on-one. However, if Fortune put up the sign-up sheet, please feel free to put the title of your topic.
Absolutely.
Again, title doesn't, whatever you put right now, keep in mind, on many occasions, sometimes you write a paper till you finish writing the entire paper, then you find like you need to change the introduction and the abstract because the paper your idea has morphed into something else. So totally fine. Same with the topic.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone?
I have a follow-up question. This is Misty.
Hey, Misty. Sure.
So for the paper, I've been looking at the instruction from the day one kickoff and kind of shaping a couple of ideas that I will get on the calendar to talk through. But in the meantime, I just want to make sure I understand, do we need to look to publish our paper at a conference, or you're saying if we plan to, then we should just let you know?
Yes, if you plan to, it's not a requirement of the class. If the requirement for the class, you do not need to publish it in a conference or journal. However, then that means you will just follow the class template, which is very basic, honestly, in just Word document. If you do want to publish it in a conference or a specific journal, you're free to follow the requirement of that conference and journal. Keep in mind, it's not a requirement, so it's up to you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay, I think we're all good. So the other thing I plan on doing, I know there are a couple of remaining of discussions, like for next week and through the, I believe, is it week 11? Yep. So we'll get in those discussions, and then also the activities we'll kind of put in the activity sessions. Can everybody please go on mute? We'll put in the activities. Then I plan on starting to grade the reports. So at least you will start seeing your grades. I know the class has been ongoing with really not much, but at least I know Fortune has been grading the discussions, but I'll start grading the reports. So keep an eye on that. And then also, what's next? Yeah, so I guess for now, you do have a starting point for your papers. Same with the project. The rubric for the project is up there. There's really no rubric per se for the paper other than all those requirements must be followed. So like when you look at the template, it's a paper. So there at least has to be an abstract or introduction. There has to be some form of literature review, a methodology, which is basically a strategy and a form of conclusion. If you're following if you're following the journal, feel free to follow their requirement. You just have to update us on that journal requirement so we're familiar with it, and that satisfies it. At least now you do have a starting point for your finals. Same with the projects. We will close on these discussions. Again, as always, feel free to go to the class kind of repo to see where we are and what's upcoming. Let me see this. Where is the class project? Here it is. And trying to see what's closed. Okay, so I am prioritizing the grading here, and then some of those hands-on activities, I will close them, and then grading the projects as well. Currently, we are here. A part of me is thinking of inviting some guest speakers, but that's tentative, depending on who we identify. It's really late in the semester. This is ongoing. I'm not done with it. And then, yeah. So if there are no questions, I'm just gonna dive into this lecture. Any questions or all good? All right. So I'm going to switch my screen to today's lectures. Okay, so today we'll be talking about reporting and monitoring, mostly focus on that monitoring aspect of things. And we're going to look at it from a perspective of continuous monitoring, right? And keep in mind, later in the class, maybe after our break, Fortune will give us kind of basically he will go over program and project management. So he's PMP certified and all of those. So he will just, I know some of you are as well, but the idea is we've been talking about the importance of planning and when it comes to cyber risk management. So Fortune is just going to walk us through that. But for the first part of the class, we are going to cover risk reporting and monitoring. And what that is, it's so we touch on the identification part, also assessment, and the last class we touched in depth around responding to risk as well as mitigations and things like that. But let's ignore the word mitigation. Just focus on we discuss in depth around responding to risk, which includes mitigation itself. It also includes risk transfer, sharing, and all of those, right? We touched a bit on those. Now, as I mentioned, today we will get into that monitoring side of things. So a high-level recap, I guess I'll only focus on that risk response that we touched on last week, right? Once you are done with identification and assessing the risk, we mentioned the need to respond to the risk, and accepting the risk in itself is a form of response, right? Or applying a control or transferring it, such as insurance and all of that. That's what we discuss next week. But once you respond to the risk, it's not the end, right? you now have to keep monitoring. And I have a very simplistic example. If you kind of, you have a vehicle and there are those kind of risks that were identified around the need to inflate your tires, the need to do all of those things, such as like tune up and everything. Okay, so we then did all of those applier control, but now you do have to continuously monitor to make sure that it's effective. At least for vehicles, we do have indicators, which we are going to talk about in a bit later, right? So when the red light or maybe some form of warning sign comes out relating to maybe your engine, then okay, there is another risk, right? Maybe the control that is in place is not functioning effectively or at the capacity that it's meant to function. Now, at least that indicator is all part of monitoring. So basically today we're going to deep dive into once you install a control or you respond to a risk in general, how do you continuously monitor it? And I'm not talking about how to from an activity standpoint day to day, but rather what are we monitoring and what strategy do we adopt towards monitoring, right? And again, there is always the need to document. So again, using the simplistic example I just gave around when an engine light comes on in a vehicle, it's basically a form of monitoring, right? The fact that you have that light, it's because there is something that is monitoring your engine continuously. When there is a risk identified, then it notifies you. But the reporting aspect of it is the engine light coming up. So when it goes from, normally engine lights do not even show up till there is a warning sign. So when it just shows orange, that's a form of reporting. So it's reporting to you that there is a potential risk relating to, say, your engine. And those kind of reporting are usually based on thresholds, right? So whatever it is, maybe the car manufacturer has put certain things, maybe it's an engine oil. So if the engine oil is below a certain threshold or maybe within a certain range, then the engine light should come up to notify you that you need to service your engine. Same thing with like your tire. If the air within the tire goes below a certain threshold, then the indicator comes up to report to you that there is a risk and you do need to address it, which responding to the risk means maybe inflating your tire or even going to see if you need to change your tire. So that is that aspect of the reporting and monitoring. And we will talk about those kind of indicators. So as I started getting into it, there are indicators, definitely, but what are those indicators? That's where we get into key risk indicators, right? Can anyone give me kind of what does KRI, beyond key risk indicators, like what does it mean beyond what's written here? Anybody? From your organizational standpoint, as you're doing your strategy at work and someone said, yeah, let's go define some KRIs. What does that mean?
Well, usually key risk indicators are put in place to make sure that if you set certain thresholds, either minimum or maximum, if they're going beyond that, perhaps logins and someone putting in the wrong password, they have a three strike you're out kind of thing. After three, why is this individual forgetting their password so often? Are they maybe there's a compromise that's occurring. So an indicator just gives you that sense if your control is doing the job or not, really.
Got it. So within your example, then what will be the indicator? You mentioned if someone attempts to log in 3 times. So, and that, by the way, I do agree with that. Now, what's specifically the indicator?
Well, the indicator is if it's over 3 times, perhaps in 5 minutes, and they're not getting in, it's not allowing them to access their account. It might be a sign that someone else is trying to access the information.
All right. So then one could say basically it's the level in comparison to the threshold, right? To the defined thresholds, where the number 3 is really the threshold of login attempts, right? And then anything above that could be a risk indicator. So it does need to be reported, right? And the whole aspect of really continuously monitoring to make sure that no more than 3 attempts were done, or at least 3 attempts that have been, like 3 attempts are reported. That's the whole aspect of the monitoring in itself. And that I certainly agree with you. Absolutely. So, from an organizational also perspective, it could be that they will receive an alert or when a risk is approaching a certain level beyond a threshold, and that threshold could become then what? I mean, in the previous class, we mentioned risk threshold, risk culture, and all of those things. And if you could remember, we mentioned that organizations usually define a threshold, and anything out of bounds of that threshold then starts becoming an unacceptable level, right? So anything within that threshold is now the acceptable level, and maybe out of it, it's unacceptable. So as such, to Vito's example, maybe 2 password attempts, it's okay, but 3 and above, it's unacceptable, right? It could be a sign of, someone is trying to brute force and things like that. So how do we determine or select our KRIs, those key risk indicators, right? We have them over there. I'm not going to kind of read it, but the whole idea is when selecting KRIs, there is a need to, 1, ensure alignment with business. As always, everything will be in alignment with the business objectives or the mission of the organization or whatever it is. And it is always very common when implementing KRIs to kind of include too many risk indicators or omit certain important risk indicators. So then there is a need to really pay much attention to that. An example is around that password parameters. We could put the KRI indicators to be from a login attempt, but then forgetting that maybe we do have a multi-factor authenticator. So you put the right username and password, accepted, but then it's a wrong authenticator, right? Wrong multi-factor authenticator code. Then another one. So maybe 3 times, and omitting the multi-factor authenticator, kind of not defining a threshold relating to the multi-factor authenticator could also be a risk. But if we decide to just leave it as username and password, then maybe an adversary got their hands on the password. So they're able to really predict that password. But when it comes to the multi-factor authenticator, they are just randomly guessing. So all of those, well, even though it depends their ability to crack that, that's a different conversation. So it's common when defining KRIs to omit certain important risk indicators, and then, or maybe to even include those that are unnecessary. So how do we also kind of identify the metrics? As we mentioned, like with the username and password, we said 3. That's a metric, right? For us to define the threshold as well as based on the indicators, there has to be some form of a metric. We mentioned 3. 3 is specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant, and it's also timely. So we have this SMART metrics concept, right? Of really ensuring that we define our metrics. Fortune, do you mind just pausing for 5 minutes? I apologize, everybody. I just need a couple of minutes and I'll be right back. So yeah, that basically KRIs, and there's also KPIs, which we are going to get into a little bit. So I know Vito kind of gave us an example of what a KRI is. Anybody want to take on the KPIs? What are KPIs and how do they differ with KRIs? Anybody?
Key performance indicators, KPI. It's basically performance versus risk. So
yes. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, performance basically operational. Some of the operational stuff in IT. That could be how our servers are performing, CPU, bandwidth, things like that. We measure up. I guess risk is the way you said it previously. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's okay. So basically, and you're right, by the way. KRIs kind of, as we mentioned, identify risk, and you can see it from focusing on that side of, for lack of a better word, the negative aspect of things, from what are potential risk, what could cause a damage, what could be, a negative effect. While KPIs are more on that, performance, as you mentioned, it's really to measure a process a process and performance in relation to stated goals, right? So earlier we mentioned KRIs will look at things from a threshold perspective, and these KPIs tend to look at it from a stated goals. An example of that will be maybe, let's see. So earlier Vito mentioned an example of a KRI will be login attempts if it's above 3. Good. But then what if we have always kind of had complaints from customers that they are unable to log in, right? It usually takes them 5 attempts before they can log in. So then now we are thinking of, let's start looking at how many complaints that we get in, right? If a week passes by and we didn't hear any complaint from anybody, then probably that's a KPI, right? It means like, okay, whatever it is we're doing to resolve those kind of complaints, that's working. Or if we are used to getting 10 complaints and then we got only 2, that's a sign of KPI, but a goal must be defined. That's one key thing. Even though it's okay to have KPIs without a defined goal, but most time they are more measurable when you have a defined goal. So when you start looking at, let's use number 3, number of resolved complaints. If you have 100 complaints from customers on a weekly basis, and you are looking forward to really having lesser complaints, and you start getting like, 80 within a week and then 70 within a week, that's good. You do have KPI, you have indicators and everything, but it's even much better if you define a goal that, okay, the goal is for us by next week to have 50% of the complaints, right? So instead of 100, now you're looking forward to getting 50. Once you get to 50 within a week, that's a good KPI. But if you're only down, like say, 25%, now you have 75 complaints. You're performing, but not necessarily well as you intend to. So those are kind of example of KPIs. Common thing is also customer satisfaction, uptime, right? Network uptime. If Azure or AWS promise or maybe wrote within a contract that part of their service level agreement that the network availability or uptime will be 99.99%, then that's the goal. And if they're able to provide that, at least then there is a KPI of measurement. If they fail behind it, then now you know. And on your part, maybe as a consumer, you might say, okay, I'm fine with a downtime of 1%. So you do need an uptime of 99%. So any downtime that is at 2%, now we are talking about you can only get 98% uptime, maybe it's unacceptable. Now you do have a KRI and you have a threshold defined. So basically, they kind of work hand in hand, but they are different, right? Again, you can use the smart metrics to have identifiers as well as your indicators for KPIs. Okay, so both of these involve couple of things, as we mentioned, data, metrics, some form of measurement and all of that. That brings us to data collections, right? So how do you collect data related to KPIs and KRIs when defining them? Obviously, we touch on this at the beginning of the class around like internal data sources. So if we're talking about complaints, you can use tickets to see how many tickets are open. If you're talking about really assessment posture or your security posture, you can then look into like what is the most recent risk assessment and how does it compare with previous risk assessment. If you're trying to improve your documentations because the last project failed due to lack of documentations, maybe the last project manager got hit by a bus and you realize, oh, wow, you cannot even move on because there are no documentation. So now you start documenting. How do you begin to then see if there are KRIs? Like, how do you begin to come up with certain KRIs? Is maybe by defining those type of documentations that must be available. But then what are the performance indicators? Is by looking at, are those documents really ongoing? Is everybody updating those documentation on whatsoever? And those could be your data sources. Earlier we mentioned also login attempts. Well, how would you capture those login attempts? It could be from activity logs as well as event logs within your system. Incident reports could also be used. But then also there are external sources, right? When you look at it from, let's say, antivirus, right? If your organization is constantly getting certain type of malware or whatever it is, or maybe adversaries are trying to access your internal network and all of that, maybe there are some malicious attempts has to do with certain malware, then maybe you might begin looking at what type of malware is it, where is it coming from, and those might be able to you might be able to get certain data from maybe CVEs and all of those type of repositories. You can also look at current media reports to identify maybe it's a trend, right? Maybe there is an ongoing, let's take a step back. You are within the, what kind of industry? Maybe you're within the healthcare, and just like COVID happened, and there is now a trend of people really trying to masquerade themselves as certain entities, maybe identity theft that is targeting the health industry. So from media reports, you might be able to learn about that and definitely set up some KRIs in terms of the behaviors. Maybe if someone calls via cell and say, this person would, maybe there are certain behaviors, right? So all of those are certain data sources you'll be able to gather to really understand how to begin strategizing your monitoring aspects, as well as continuous reporting. For your organization, if Aja today keeps hearing that something is happening with AWS, it is only right for Microsoft to also make sure it's learning from that and positioning itself for similar thing not to happen. Same thing on the other side, right? So all of those are ways to kind of gather data and extract them. So monitoring controls in itself, now you have defined your KRI and KPIs related to whatever control it is, right? Continuous feedback is always needed. Verifying that the controls are working is also needed, as well as a couple of steps relating to monitoring the controls. Sorry, everybody, I just have a little one here that's just bugging me. So I'm gonna take him back upstairs, okay? There is always a need to continuously monitor control, right? And we already touched on different types of monitoring. We discussed self-assessment within organizations, automated assessments, third parties, including bringing in external auditors and your internal organizational kind of assessment team to also do those kind of assessments, right? And continuous monitoring. Kanban is a thing. So, and we have continuously heard of SOCs, like Security Operations Center, part of monitoring. Part of their roles include monitoring as well. So, and different types of assessment. We have already covered this, by the way, in the previous classes, but audits, we know what audits are. It could be annual, it could be one time, it depends on how organization or regulatory bodies define their auditing processes, right? Vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, third-party assurances. So third-party assurances usually involve kind of certification. So let's say a third party kind of comes in to do a certain validation, test, and assessments on whatsoever, and they issue a certain certification. That's a certain assurance. Could be annual, depending on the regulation, could be continuous, and that third party might also have its own continuous monitoring requirements. Now, also, like, let's say an example of third-party assurance could be like PCI DSS certifications, including like FedRAMP certifications, DoD certifications. All of these regulatory bodies go fall under third-party assurance. The results of those assessments, right? We are used to looking at assessment results. If you want to see a sample, go to GAO, I guess, from audit standpoint. But there are certain principles in place around assessment, right? Some assessments are meant to establish a maturity model, and that's things around like CMM models and all of that. But basically what it's meant to do is just to indicate the maturity of an organizational process, right, around that CMM. And then it could be focused on showing the maturity of a risk management process. It could be focused on showing the maturity of maybe hiring process. It depends, right? But whatever it is, the model must be optimized, predictable, established, managed, performed. Sorry, not the model per se, but like the ranking of that, right? Where the process must be either optimized, predictable. That's kind of like the ranking of the assessment result in itself, not necessarily the metrics of measurement, but rather the ranking. So an organization can be considered as optimized in terms of its risk management processes, or the process could be considered incomplete, right? And there are other bodies that tend to do CMM actually assessments. Most of the Big Four, I know they do that, like Deloitte, KPMG, most of these auditing firms where they give a certification. But another example of a CMM model could be Gartner reports, right? Where you can see, even though it doesn't follow like the optimized, predictable, established, manager, performer, incomplete, but I don't know if some of you know of the Gartner kind of ranking where it takes something maybe, let's use an example, cloud providers, right? And then it will rank cloud providers based on where they, based on their processes and how undependable they are, right? Based on their maturity. Then the last part is something around changes to IT risk profile. So we have talked about this, and we'll always talk about this. This and documentation are kind of things that are always applicable at any stage of a risk management, right? Any change to your risk profile could negatively or really undermine your processes. Whatever it is, how you respond to a risk will introduce another risk. If you choose to accept a risk, it could have kind of a dominoes effect into other things. Whatever it is, there is a need for a continuous, be it annual or a continuous review of monitoring and reporting program in itself. So your entire monitoring program, there is a need to look into how are we monitoring, because it's possible you have now added additional controls that require a separate monitoring methodology, but if you apply your conventional way, then it becomes inapplicable or maybe ineffective. So the monitoring process in itself needs to be continuously reviewed. Same with the reporting. An example of a reporting could be let's go back to that control. Actually, let's get away. Initially, I was going to use the access, the 3 login attempts. So let's say Now you have defined your access control list within like your firewall, right? So you're blocking certain traffic and certain traffic are allowed. Now, maybe our reporting mechanism was to send an email once there is an attempt, maybe on a certain channel or maybe a certain port. And it could be an email, and we define that a delay of, 3 minutes is okay. But then we added another tool that requires continuous monitoring. And by continuous monitoring, I'm talking about it's maybe public facing right now. And any attempt on it, we would like to know immediately. So we respond to it. As such, you decided to set up a dedicated 24 hours, 365, security operations center where there is someone continuously monitoring. But then you forget to recalibrate the reporting mechanism where, yes, you do have an individual continuously behind a computer waiting to see if there's an alert so they take an action, but you did not review the reporting aspect of it where there was a delay of 3 minutes. As such, you still have that delay of 3 minutes and you might eventually miss out on something important within that time frame that you are meant to set. So basically having that person, I wouldn't say it's not useful, but you still create that same delay because they will not be notified without till after that 3 minutes that you initially defined. If you want a continuous notification and instant notification, then probably you do need to change the way monitoring is done. And if email is not the best, then maybe you might need to provide a certain automation tool or maybe an automated incident response and incident reporting kind of tool that will allow that to happen. But basically, this is just kind of the need to continuously review your monitoring or reporting program. And to wrap up kind of the entire part of things, I mean, just a final summary. So we kind of discussed how proper and effective management of risk in general, and we also discussed basically end-to-end thing. But one key thing is to remember is truly risk management is a never-ending process, and it's truly not a never-ending process, right? It's a life cycle, but then at the same time, it's continuously alive, right? It never dies within an organization. So long as an organization exists, then there has to be some form of risk management, and it needs to be continuously evolving alongside the organization objectives, goals, mission, the industry trends, whatever tool is being used, and all of those. And the final thing is we kind of covered all of these from an ISACA approach. As I mentioned beginning of the class, most of these, we covered them from a theoretical standpoint. Will then next week, I plan on presenting a couple of frameworks that around risk management, as well as controls and how you'll be able to go access those and see how it applies to your organizations. And we might take one or two frameworks to deep dive into them, as well as Fortune will also kind of cover, I think Fortune plans to cover HIPAA. So we'll also touch on that. And then later on, we'll get into our activity aspects to kind of apply these theoretical knowledge through the activities. Questions from anyone? Guess none. So if we can take a 15 minutes break, and then once we're back, Fortune will kind of go over product and project management. Right?
Great. Well, hello, class. As you already know, if you don't know, my name is Fortune Zerike. I'm the teaching assistant for this class for IT 727, managing cybersecurity risk. And I'm a doctoral student in my second year as well. But today, for the purpose of this class, we'll be walking through the IT project management domains and hitting some of the key objective of IT project management. Recently completed my PMP, so I have a solid understanding of the project management and how to make a effective and well fluid project management program for cybersecurity or any type of sector within IT. And also, I'm a program manager right now at Microsoft, which I use this on the daily. So we'll go ahead and walk through these different things, make it interactive. Love to hear your thoughts, and we'll just go from there. Okay. And can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes, all right, great. So some of the objectives that we'll be hitting, first thing that we'll be hitting is understanding project management components and frameworks, identifying agile and waterfall methods, and enabling the 3 domains, which is something that I really learned more and more about when I was studying my PMP, which are the 3 domains are people, process, and business environment within a workspace, which all these things are intertwined and needed to be together to hit the opportunity or give us the opportunity to reach our goals and reach our project of our success of what we're trying to do to ensure that we are trying to hit those goals for our leadership team. Next part of this slide is planning as a risk professional. Of course, us coming from a cybersecurity background, having a cybersecurity mindset, these are some of the things that we want to think about as we're going and planning as a risk professional. I guess this is the opportunity that I would like to know how many project managers, if anybody here is a project manager, if anybody here is a project management, does project management or have experience within project management and cybersecurity, can you maybe, touch on a few things that you may look for before I walk through these 4 different steps or 4 different points that I want to hit as a risk professional? Are there any things that you guys may do in your day-to-day job that entails project management within the cybersecurity domain or field? Anybody? Am I the only program manager here in cybersecurity?
Yeah, fortune is Vito. I have in the past, but lately, because I do more VCSO work, I work with the PMs assigned. And the big thing is what you put in programs C and D, the current state and future state. So making sure those gaps are followed and stay within scope, but also the business value, why we're doing them. As we're making changes to the environment, the business value with regards to, successful outcomes, right?
Yeah. And that's really the goal, to make sure we identify these gaps or potential roadblocks that may slow down our projects or add these constraints, or in some cases, sometimes, as a project management, sometimes the job to be very efficient with the budget and make sure that we're not spending unnecessary money and tackling those roadblocks and producing those business values that you talked about just recently. Anybody else have experience within project management or just project management and security or just general project management, as I just mentioned?
One of the things that I do, this is Misty, definitely in my job, this is a time where finding folks with specialized cybersecurity skill sets is pretty tough, especially with more technical acumen. So I'm constantly looking at doing a cost analysis with our PCO office, figuring out per our open recs for staffing, how can we staff within and meet like our cost analysis, what we bid for that particular position, and make sure that we're not staffing over what we bid for that slot, and looking at how do we spread that across. And then also saying, if I hire someone under the bid over here and someone over there, then how can I equalize some of that cost expenditure and spread some of that wealth to the other side? So doing a lot of cost analysis seems to be my job today as it relates to staffing on a contract.
Yeah, for sure. Some of my job, cost benefit analysis, human efforts, is it worth our time, or is it worth our burning our resources, our budget? That's all entails. And, really planning as a risk professional, we have to determine our portfolio, program, and project. For a portfolio, this may sound one-on-one basic. Sorry about that. This may sound one-on-one. This may sound like one-on-one PMP type of stuff, but multiple programs are within the portfolio. Multiple projects are within the program, and we need to make sure that they're aligned to our business needs. So, for a portfolio, some of the things that we're doing is identifying the number of programs, as I said earlier, There's multiple programs within a portfolio, and then we need to identify the stakeholders. Like, who are our stakeholders? Who are we trying to make happy? Who are the people that we're trying to get promoted? In the Microsoft world, our professor here, he would be one of my stakeholders if I was doing one of our project, because he's a few levels higher than me. So if I mess up, he may fire me or talk to the CEO to fire me. But that's no problem.
Nope. Nope, don't even say that. I'm not gonna cut that from the recording. Class, he's just saying it. Nope.
Just joking.
Oh my God. Yeah.
No worries. And the next thing that we talk about is our budget and constraints. Budget is fine. It's good to have a sound budget, understanding where we don't want to go too high, and make sure that we're anticipating those roadblocks or those barriers or those constraints that may slow down our projects, and also may slow down our timeline along the way. You know, some of these constraints may slow us down. We may not be able to deliver on what we said we were going to deliver to our stakeholders at a certain time. And another thing that I would like to mention, which is D, is key objectives. Something that that's been really embedded is, you know, those key objective. I know the professor just talked about it earlier, about key indicators and stuff of that nature. Is something we call objective key results, which is OKRs, which is really big in the Microsoft world, really big in the project management world. We want to make sure that we're hitting those key objectives and producing those results. Next thing I want to talk about is program, identifying projects with the program, identifying project managers, understanding our current state plus our future state. So when I look at current state, where are we right now? How do we look? What does our environment look like? What does our environment look like? Where is our status as of today? And where are we trying to go? Where are we trying to go? What does the future state look like? How does that look like? How is that scoping and planning and the resources and different things that we need to ensure that we hit that future state? So working through that between our current state and our future state, where are we planning to go? What is our vision? What is our goal? And then delivering business value. I know one of the classmates just talked a little bit about that, business value. And business value could be a range of different things. If you look at it from the cybersecurity posture, you want to remediate activities, want to remediate different vulnerabilities that are within your environment, and different stuff of that nature. You want to have a lot of different automations in place to be able to reduce human efforts on your cybersecurity professional team. Efforts, you want to be able to reduce those efforts from your cybersecurity engineers and stuff of that nature to be able to remediate different activities. There's a lot of different business value that you can look at it from a holistic, broad standpoint, but that's our goal, to provide business value. And project, defining your project methodology or life cycle. I know we'll dive a little bit into that in more detail on the next slide, between the two methods, agile and waterfall method. There's a certain mindset you have to have between the two. And like I said, we'll dive a little bit into that, and identifying project managers for these projects and project activities to understand where we're about to go. So is anybody familiar with, before we go into our next slide, is anybody familiar with the agile and waterfall method? If anybody is, before I go to the next slide and we talk a little bit more into it, does anybody want to let me know their thoughts on those two methods, the difference between the two?
The agile method allows for sprints. It allows you to react to things within certain short bursts of timeframes, whereas waterfall is the more traditional method where you may lay things out within a time scope and have them all rolled into a defined end. There is usually less flexibility in a waterfall method versus an agile method, but depending on if it's a long-term or short-term development, either or may make better sense.
Which one's more flexible between the two?
The agile method is usually more flexible.
Okay, that's correct. Anybody else have any other statements towards that topic between the two that want to provide us insight?
With the agile method, you are producing usable functionality on a more regular basis. So, like you mentioned, I forget the word you used. I think it was tuned to or requirements change relatively quickly, or things change within the development cycle relatively quickly. That's what happens in the agile environment. Versus with waterfall, you're gonna have to wait till it's done to say, did we get what we asked for? And after the entire project is complete.
Gotcha. That's correct. Cool. So let's go on to our next. I realized that I'm not even on the slide. I'm on PDF, but no worries. Just keep going. Okay. Agile method versus waterfall. I know some of you, the last two people, just hit on some key points. I thought this visual was really good, a great way to explain it from a visual standpoint. As you can see, it has the different steps for each of the different methods. When you talk about agile method, you talk about a continuous cycle, high functioning, collaborative. Someone just said earlier that this method is more flexible, which is true. It involves customer involvement. It's flexible. It's an opportunity for us to work together and collaborate and adapt to change in an uncertain environment. For waterfall, I look at waterfall to be more linear, upfront planning, a lot of upfront planning, a lot of requirements that need to be held. I look at it from a regulatory and law perspective. You want to hit those different requirements and ensures that it's basically close to project management for involvement. And like I said, you will want to use this for around regulatory changes, law type of requirements, those set standards, those set requirements. Agile method gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more opportunity to continue on a continuous cycle.
I want to chime in real quick there, if you don't mind. I think for us, from a security standpoint, irrespective of the methodology being used, one of the key things that we have always heard is around big insecurity, right? So rather than just go through it, we have to ensure that at each single step, we are putting security in mind, right? Lately, there are different approaches like DevSecOps and whatsoever that are meant to complement existing project management methodologies. But basically, it's just the thought of, and I believe some of you are very familiar with DevSecOps, especially those of you on the DoD side. But the notion of as we are planning, designing, developing, testing, reiterating, or even retiring, you name it, or even pushing to prod and all of those, what are the security risks? That is a fundamental thing from a cybersecurity risk management perspective, right? So.
Thank you for that input. Does anybody else want to add any input before we go on to the mindset, which is the mindset of agile and methods or waterfall methods? Has there been a time where you guys ever used this into any of your day-to-day activities, into any of your day-to-day role as a cybersecurity professional? Is there anybody that want to speak a little bit on that?
The thing that would happen in the organization I was in with previously or years ago was security scans would happen at the end of our development cycle when we use the waterfall methodology, and when we would receive our POEM items, and it would have hundreds and hundreds of items to remediate, all high, because we didn't integrate security activities within the development cycle. So our developers are busy working and building without factoring in adequate security, without adequate security activities being factored into their development cycle. That was 7 years ago, not long. But on a team that I joined a little while later, security activities were built into our development cycle. So security was actually involved in performing scans and ensuring that the developer's code was produced with security standards in mind, thus saving time on the back end, because it wasn't a slap to the face when we were trying to deploy a system that had more security remediation activities necessary than anyone had hoped for. So just a kind of, and then a long time ago, then a little while later, things improved. And that one little improvement made the entire project management cycle improve, and our deployment cycle improve as well.
So you talked a lot about how you found a lot of high vulnerabilities. Was this the testing part of the steps of the phase? Did that not catch any of the high vulnerabilities, or was this something that was probably after the testing?
It all happened at the end, and not while things were being developed. That was the problem.
Gotcha.
So they would do all the development work and then test at one time. Thus producing vulnerabilities that we then have to remediate and go back through the development cycle to remediate and then scan again.
Interesting. Wow.
Thank you for that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but as things change and things progress, that way of doing business finally ended, and it's no longer things like those types of methods are no longer utilized, especially with a more iterative development methodology that requires testing to be done as you're developing your work products.
Yeah, I think there are always, iterations and kind of couple of changes here and there to all of these methodologies. So I absolutely wouldn't be surprised to see nuances and kind of changes. It's interesting to see how also organizations usually take these and, customize it to themselves. So that's quite interesting.
Thank you for sharing.
I was getting ready to say something very similar to that, Professor, that what I find today is that it's not a strict agile or a strict waterfall method, but we're really starting to see the customization and combining of these ideas and ideologies and methodologies in the way that we approach projects. So for example, in each of those components of the waterfall, you might have an agile method of how you get to that larger step that folds into it. And we're starting to see pieces of that because there is a lot of good value in the waterfall effect for long-term projects by hitting that big bang up front, taking a longer time to start, but having well-defined requirements. But there's also a lot of benefit to your short-run items being very flexible, being able to pivot as needed. And so we're seeing that in each of these components in the waterfall, you might implement or fold in some agile methodology to make sure that all those items are well defined and you have some flexibility within each of those components in the waterfall. So it's definitely starting to see a combination of these things bridge in certain projects.
100% agree. I think it's definitely something we've been stressing, the need to kind of customize and align everything to basically your organization's business objectives and your mission and whatsoever. And this also applies to project management. You cannot just take a generic template and slap it across everything. So yeah, we've been definitely seeing quite a lot of optimizations, integration, and some form of hybrid methodologies. That's great.
Thank you.
So, sorry, I agree both with Misty and I'm sorry if I didn't an individual's name, but with regards to agile method, in cybersecurity projects, where cybersecurity or security should be included in every phase, the agility of going back to a phase that you've already done is pertinent to a cybersecurity project. I mean, you could introduce it into design, develop, and once you get to test, if something was missing, and testing is always, the real factor, where everything you thought of in design and developing it, if something's missing in test with regards to a patch or a code that you've implemented, but it alters the design of it, you can easily go back. Whereas waterfall, once you've left a stage, you can't go back. So, again, in different projects are different methods. However, in a true cybersecurity project, we really focus on the agility of it, just because, security, as Professor mentioned, security is never a set it and forget it. It's always changing. And that's exactly, especially if it's a long-term project, security is going to change. So I find that agility is a lot more proficient with regards to cybersecurity projects, but that's just my opinion, really.
No, I actually agree. I agree with what you're saying. And that goes on to the next slide about the mindset that we need to have when we're using these methods. These are the mindsets that I think and feel free if anybody disagree with the agile method is responded to change. The ability to adapt or tailor to a process, as you mentioned earlier about cybersecurity, just ever so changing is it's a dynamic field, sharing information with each other and collaborating. And then number 4 is focusing on delivering the value. Waterfall method is a project plan. You need to plan ahead of time. It takes that planning stage, that initialization stage. It's silo in a way to me. It's isolated and it's based on time value. So like you said, you just mentioned, if you go on the next step, it's kind of hard to go back compared to how you could do it for agile. So these are the mindsets. These are the 4 mindsets that I looked at both of these different methods when dealing with these two. When dealing with these methods, these are the mindsets that you should already know going into it or knowing what you're going to have to deal with. The next part I want to talk about is the first domain, which this is the first domain that was a part of the PMP that I just recently passed. This was the first domain that most organizations are even thinking about, you know, the 14 qualities and tasks, skills, and activities associated with having an with effectively leading a project team. And these are some of the first thing that you need to think about is the people, you know. These are the 14 tasks. Managing conflict, lead a team, support team performance, empower team members and stakeholders, and so forth. Ensure team members and stakeholders are adequately trained, build a team, address and remove obstacles and blockers of the team, and negotiate different things. Is there anything here within these 14 tasks that may stand out to anybody, or they may stay incorrect, or that may be just as important as the next one down to it when we talk about it from a people perspective of project management and within the security environment? Sounds good. Okay, well, there are many ways. I think what stands out to me about this within the 14 tasks is leading a team. I think there's multiple, it's pretty self-explanatory, leading a team. There's multiple different ways of how to lead a team. There's no one perfect approach for every situation. So leading a team, whether if it's a cybersecurity team or IT team or networking team or cloud team, whatever the case may be, there's always a different type of formulation or some type of way of effectively leading a team and trying different methods. I'll go ahead and talk about the next domain, which is process, which is very important. Below are the 17 tasks and processes needed in reinforcing the technical aspects of managing a project. You execute a project with urgency required to deliver business value, which we talked about earlier. Manage communication, assess and manage risk, engage stakeholders, plan and manage budget and resources, plan and manage schedule, plan and manage the quality of products and deliverables, plan and manage the scope, integrate project planning activities, which is a big one, manage project change. That's a huge one. We always have to be ready for change. Sometimes these changes are unforeseen, unknown. It could just come and delay your timeline. It could mess up a lot of different things. It could push you behind your timeline and mess up a lot of different things of your different approach. And you have to figure out ways to overcome it and remediate those things to stay back on task. And then you have plan and manage procurement, manage project artifacts, determine appropriate project methodology and methods and practice in place, which we discussed just a few minutes ago. Establish project governance structure, manage project issues, ensure knowledge and transfer of project continuity, and plan and manage project/phase closure or transition. Is there ever a time, I guess I just want to hear a little bit from the class when it comes down to the processes of being, in cybersecurity, processes are very important. Can you give me a time maybe when a process wasn't defined correctly, and it kind of threw off the whole team or threw off the whole project that you were working on? Maybe you missed the requirement steps, the scope wasn't clearly defined.
This class? Instead of the syllabus saying these are the weeks and now we kind of pushed something out, that's a project, right?
Yeah, That's a good one.
I think
I know I had a few
we,
emails, you know, you guys. Go ahead.
no, I mean, I think we all had a couple of projects and dealing with ambiguity, it's very common.
Yeah.
We've had a few where you know, we're doing assessments for clients for a certain goal, and then during maybe halfway through the project, they come up with, hey, can you also do this? Can you also do that? And although these are change orders, it does affect the scope of the project, especially if there's a timeline. I have a company that wants to go public, and they want to do an assessment based on some of their you know, financial reporting and accountability. But that was introduced after we started doing an actual NIST cybersecurity framework project. So it's hard because you have to now integrate it. Again, there's the agility, right? Where I say agile project management, you can go back and try to integrate what they want into your project. Whereas I think with waterfall, we would have to start a whole new timeline if we were in that area. So scope creep is always something that hinders a project if you can't really control it. And of course, the budget is also an aspect as well.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
100% agree with you on that. And it starts getting ugly, especially if previous tasks are like if you have a lot of dependencies and then something kind of changes, then now it kind of begins to have a ripple kind of effect. So yep, I agree with you on that 100%.
Yeah, you know, I think it's easier when the client asks for it, whereas if you don't catch it during the design phase and then you have to introduce it, there's a lot more friction at that point. But you know, hey, it is what it is, right?
Well, if you're a consultant, then you go deal with your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's always ugly, but yeah.
Consulting life.
Something I'd like to see on this list, I think, as an 18th process would be requirements definition. And I think that a lot of the things on this list become more manageable when you have clear upfront requirements definition, and that you have coordination of what those requirements mean, because we can interpret things very differently between our clients. And your clients, your customers, and your stakeholders can all be different groups who have different needs that need to fold into the project. And so I think that there should be a level of importance on the requirements definition to make sure upfront we all know what the expectation is.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. Requirements definitely a part of processes.
Absolutely agree.
Great. Next slide.
Question? Sorry. Same thing with like project management and product management. But I was looking at it. What about backlog management in itself, right? Where we're capturing all of these, be it what I use it like a Jira, a Canva bot, or a project tool, whatsoever. Is that something that should be its own process, or is it embedded into one of these? Like we are capturing all of these, like planning, managing the scope and whatsoever, but what about documenting it? Anyone? Okay, I guess we can move forward.
Documentation is absolutely important because you need to make sure you know exactly what happened and you have a clear laid out plan. And when I've done like SLDC projects where I'm going over the software development lifecycle for something that we're building, it needed to be written in concrete. And so in doing so, the documentation process of making sure you capture the right amount of information and it was scoped well, that was key to the success of the program. And I think that goes back to just laying out plans that we can all understand.
Agree, and that actually, I thought of that because you mentioned the need to have clear deliverables defined, right? So like when you think of it from project management, where we tend to have a scrum master who is responsible for, closing a deliverable as satisfied or it's completely closed or it's insufficient or whatsoever. So then you begin to see that importance of really capturing those, again, as you mentioned earlier, the deliverables, and then also owning those deliverables.
And I agree with Misty, and to enforce that point, documentation is key across any aspect. Even as a former auditor, and when auditors come in, they ask for documentation to prove certain controls are in place, and projects in cybersecurity are primarily for controls. I mean, mitigating risk. And if you can't prove that you've done it, or that you appease a certain checkbox from a regulatory aspect, then that's a problem.
Agreed.
Also, going back to what you were saying earlier about what if you're a project manager or anyone of significance gets hit by a bus? How are you able to keep the project moving forward if the documentation isn't done adequately and stored properly so that others can access it in a method that's understandable and usable by everybody else involved?
Exactly. That's true. I'm seeing number 16, ensure knowledge transfer and business and project continuity. So, yep.
Cross training is very important. Documentations, that's why a lot of different organizations that I've been a part of, they've been really big on documentations and building out the wiki, especially being from a consulting background. Once you're done with that client, you may be with that client for about 6 months. So when your contract's up, those clients want to understand what you were doing for those 6 months. So you build out that wiki, you build out those playbooks or those documentations to allow the project or allow the program to continue to move forward.
Are you even a true consultant if you give them that? Because you do want the operations and management contract as well, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for your feedback. Let's go to the second and last slide, which is the business environment, highlighting connections between projects and organization strategies with the four tasks included below. 1 is plan and manage project compliance. 2, evaluate and deliver project benefits and value. 3 is evaluate and address external business environment change for the impact of scope. And 4 is support organizational changes. And on this slide, I thought the most important one was, the change for impact of scope and supporting organizational changes. Some of these organizations that we all work for, I know we're all in different sectors, are dynamic. So the organizational change, the focus could be on one thing one day, and then the priority of something else could shift depending on the importance of the value of the return and stuff of that nature. So being able to adapt to that as a project manager or program manager is crucial and important.
I agree, but I'm hesitant as well. Well, not necessarily hesitant. I'm thinking of like project compliance. Like we have had a lot of cases where projects are not in compliance. Let me now introduce that concept. You finish doing everything, you come to ATO, then you realize, well, you are collecting PIIs and you do need to satisfy certain privacy controls or whatever, but you didn't do anything along those lines. It's very common. So I guess compliance is also another in addition to the one you mentioned. But yeah.
Yep.
Anyone? Like changes, especially to business environment. I think we touched on a little bit earlier on this.
Yeah.
How does changes in leadership then affect the business environment, especially, a new CISO comes in, and we touched earlier on people's mindset and all of that, and now you have a completely separate CISO with a different approach. So all existing projects might now face a certain, restructuring. Is that something that happens common? Anybody?
Yeah, that's something that happens common a lot. I mean,
it happens all the time.
Yeah, I mean, even in organizations like, Microsoft goes through reorgs all the time. So, I mean that's the first thing I heard. Your priority may be something one day, and then the next few months, that's something I first heard when I first walked in the door. Yeah, we've been reorged about 3 times within the last 2 years. I'm like, huh? Reorg. So, I mean, I can just imagine the structure of that changing for a lot of program managers within the organizations or engineers, whatever the case may be, developers. So that's common.
That's true. I mean, it's very common, especially within the tech industry, because most of these successful products really are a lot of trial and test, where you find like probably more than 10 projects died before one is successful. So happens all the time, especially within the tech sector. Continuous change. Yeah.
Was somebody saying something? I may have. Okay. Sounds good.
I was just in agreement with what you were saying, that when someone new comes in, they have a new way of attacking the problem, and their new way of attacking the problem employ strategy that might change the different functional areas that you find important. And so when those things change, then what's been implemented may either go away, need to be modified, or adjust to whatever the new criteria is. So we're in a constant wave of change in cybersecurity because of that, but also because the way that we are managing threat and cyber warfare, those things change. And so I find that both from the introduction of emerging technologies as well as introduction of new leadership, the environment should always be changing, shifting, and morphing.
Definitely agree.
Next slide, I will like the last slide. Next slide is just a summary, just to review and talk about some of the different things we touched on, which is, ensure planning as a risk professional is understood and well known. 2, the purpose of project management is to help you see the risk and challenges that could derail the completion of the project. 3, you have the key factors of PM of a project manager, program manager, which is the project organization reputation and to save money. Number 4 is that agile methods of project management is used for a continuous cycle. And then number 5, you have waterfall methods of project management is set. For example, frameworks, laws, and regulations are some of the examples of waterfall. And then the last one is the organization should focus on 3 components: the people, process, and the business environments. Do we have any questions about anything that I may have talked about? I know I said I recently got my PMP, so I know a lot of you guys have an email if you're interested in getting that and want to know tips and different things that I used to study, which is outside this class. Feel free to message me. I can give you some of the resources I use or some of the helpful things that helped me pass that certification exam. I think this is a pretty good certification, and it helped me learn a lot along the way.
Awesome.
Any questions? Everybody good? Okay, guess I'll pass it back to you, Professor, if you want to touch on anything else.
No, I mean, thank you so much for covering that. I know a lot of folks in the class have program management experience, but for those of you who do not, if you need kind of more clarity, more planning, and whatsoever, please feel free to reach out at any time. But as always, planning is fundamental to not just cybersecurity, I guess, but most things, I will say. But when it comes to cyber risk management, we've had a lot of horror stories, so we have experienced this. So yeah. Normally we'll just have a chat on our weekly discussions, but I think we are just gonna end the class a bit early this week, for this week, and then I will catch up next week, unless someone have specific questions they wanna catch up on. Anybody?
I did have one thing. I just want to remind the class, please remember that discussion for this week is over and it will be cut off at noon, not midnight. Seems like a few people are running into that issue. So please keep in mind that the discussion ends at noon and midnight. And if you don't complete it, it's no hard feelings or anything of that nature. I'll stop the recording.